Lionel Richie canceled his concert in Chicago tonight at the United Center after an onstage health scare during Wednesday night show in Minnesota.
Now we're hearing from fans who are worried about the Grammy winner's health.
10 days of silence. That's how long one of music's most beloved voices went quiet after collapsing into a chair mid-performance, in front of thousands of fans who came expecting nothing but joy. And when Lionel Richie finally spoke again, the words he chose said less than everyone assumed they would, and more than anyone expected, if you know how to read between the lines. This is the story of what happened in St. Paul, Minnesota, what Richie's team scrambled to contain in the days that followed, and what the 77-year-old icon ultimately chose to reveal to the public once he decided to break his silence. It's a story about fame, about aging in front of an audience that refuses to let its idols grow old quietly, and about the difference between what gets reported and what actually gets confirmed. Let's start with the night everything changed. On June 24th, Lionel Richie kicked off the Sing a Song All Night Long tour alongside Earth, Wind and Fire at the Grand Casino Arena in St. Paul. By every account, the mood backstage that afternoon was electric. Richie posted to social media hours before the show, sharing rehearsal photos and soundcheck moments, radiating the kind of excitement you'd expect from a performer who has spent nearly 5 decades commanding stages around the world. There was no hint, no warning sign, nothing in his own words that suggested the night would end any differently than the hundreds of shows that came before it. For the better part of an hour, it didn't. Richie worked the crowd the way he always has, warm, funny, fully in command. Earth, Wind and Fire brought their signature energy, and the audience sang along to a set list built from decades of hits. Then came Dancing on the Ceiling, a song that has never once, in the history of Richie performing it, been a slow or subdued moment. It's fast. It's physical. It's a song built for a performer to move. And that night, he didn't. Witnesses and fan-shot footage that circulated widely afterward show Richie pausing mid-song, then taking a seat on one of the stage platforms. He didn't try to disguise what was happening. In a moment that would later define the entire story, he leaned into his microphone and told the crowd, in his own words, that when you start feeling dizzy, you sit down, and that this was the first time in the song's history he'd ever performed it seated. He even called it a bad sign himself, half joking, the way performers often do when they're trying to keep an audience calm while something genuinely concerning is happening beneath the surface. For a few minutes, the joke worked. The crowd laughed along, the way audiences do when a beloved entertainer turns a stumble into a bit. But as the song continued and Richie remained seated, the mood in the arena began to shift. Phones came out. People started looking at each other instead of the stage. Seeing a performer known for his effortless movement suddenly needing to sit down didn't feel like part of the show anymore. It felt like something else entirely. Richie transitioned to piano for a seated rendition of 3 Times a Lady, then stepped away. Fans assumed a short break. They had no idea that behind the curtain, paramedics had already been called. According to reporting from the Minnesota Star-Tribune, the crowd waited nearly 40 minutes without any official word before Earth, Wind and Fire saxophonist Dino Saldo came out to explain that Richie wasn't feeling well and wouldn't be returning. A show scheduled to run roughly 90 minutes ended at 55. The St. Paul Fire Department later confirmed to Fox News Digital that an adult man had been transported from the arena by ambulance that night to a nearby hospital. No name was given publicly by officials, but the timeline left little doubt. TMZ, citing sources close to Richie, reported the hospital visit was described as precautionary. That single word, precautionary, became one of the only concrete details anyone had to hold on to in those first chaotic hours. And in the absence of anything more specific, the internet did what it always does. It filled the silence with theories. So let's be precise about what was actually established at that point, because this is where a lot of coverage started to blur fact with assumption. It was confirmed that Richie described feeling dizzy and strange in his own words, on stage, in real time. It was confirmed he was taken to a hospital that night. It was confirmed his tour was immediately disrupted. What was not confirmed, not by Richie, not by his representatives, not by any hospital source, was an actual diagnosis. No condition. No test result. No official medical explanation of any kind. That didn't stop the consequences from being real. Richie's team quickly announced that 2 upcoming shows, one at Chicago's United Center, another at the Schottenstein Center in Columbus, Ohio, would be postponed on doctor's orders so he could rest. Consider what that actually requires logistically. Postponing a concert isn't a quiet decision made lightly. It means refunding or rescheduling tickets for thousands of people, coordinating with 2 separate venues in 2 separate cities, and pulling an entire touring production off the road on short notice. That's not the kind of call a team makes over a minor scare. That's the kind of call made when a physician tells you to make it. The official statement from Richie's camp was brief, almost clinically so. An apology for the inconvenience to ticket holders, a promise that rescheduled dates would be announced soon. No diagnosis, no details, just an apology and a quiet assurance that the tour and Richie would be back. And then, for 10 days, nothing. In that vacuum, one detail began circulating that a lot of fans latched onto as the real explanation. Earth, Wind and Fire drummer John Paris told the Minnesota Star-Tribune that Richie had shown no visible signs of illness before the show, and that Richie later told him he'd simply felt dehydrated. On its surface, that explanation makes sense. Dehydration is common on tour, especially for performers in their 70s working night after night under hot stage lighting. It would explain the dizziness. It would explain the need to sit. It would even explain a precautionary hospital stay. But here's the distinction that matters, and it's one worth sitting with. That explanation didn't come from Lionel Richie. It came second-hand, from a bandmate relaying a private conversation. That's not nothing, but it's also not the same as an artist going on record about his own health. And as of the most recent reporting available, including coverage from outlets like Entertainment Now, Richie himself has never publicly confirmed dehydration or any other specific medical explanation as the cause of what happened that night in St. Paul. That gap, between a bandmate's second-hand account and Richie's own continued silence, is exactly where speculation thrives. Fan forums and comment sections filled with theories ranging from simple exhaustion after a career built on non-stop touring, to more serious concerns tied to his age, to questions about whether decades of physically demanding performances were finally catching up with him. None of those theories had confirmation behind them. They were guesses filling space that Richie's own team had left wide open. And this is a pattern fans of legendary performers have seen before. A frightening moment on stage. A vague second-hand explanation from someone in the artist's orbit. Then weeks, sometimes longer, of guessing before the artist addresses it directly, if they ever fully do at all. Richie's situation was following that exact script right up until Independence Day. What's striking is that while Richie stayed silent online, he didn't stay off the stage. Just 6 days after being taken from that arena by ambulance, he returned to perform in Pittsburgh at PPG Paints Arena on June 30th. For a man who had just gone through a very public health scare in front of thousands of people, getting back on stage that quickly sent its own message, even without a single public word of explanation. From there, the tour continued into Detroit, Richie seemingly picking up where he'd left off. But the elephant in the room, what actually happened, and why, remained unaddressed in his own voice. That changed on July 4th. Picture it. 6 days removed from being wheeled out of an arena in an entirely different state, Richie walked back onto a stage in front of a new crowd, one that had almost certainly seen the viral footage from St. Paul before ever buying a ticket. There was no dramatic speech about recovery. No emotional address to the audience about what he'd been through. He simply performed, joked, and moved forward, letting the act of showing up speak for itself. That same day, Richie finally posted publicly about the ordeal for the first time. And the tone of what he wrote tells you almost as much as its content. It was warm. It was grateful. And it was directed almost entirely at his fans rather than at his own health. He thanked people for their messages and their concern, said he was doing well, and expressed gratitude for the outpouring of support he'd received. He spoke about how meaningful the Pittsburgh and Detroit shows had felt since his return, describing the energy and connection with the crowd. He said he was looking ahead to Toronto next. Read that statement closely, because what it leaves out matters just as much as what it includes. Richie confirmed he was recovering. He confirmed his gratitude. He confirmed he was back on stage and back on tour. What he did not do, anywhere in that message, was name a diagnosis. He didn't confirm dehydration. He didn't confirm any underlying condition. He didn't use the word fine, the way celebrities often do when they want to shut a story down completely and move on. Instead, he offered thanks, and he offered proof of life through his continued performances. So does a warm, grateful message that never once names an actual medical cause really count as an admission of anything? That's the honest tension at the center of this story, and it deserves an honest answer rather than a sensational one. Based on everything verified through credible reporting, TMZ, Fox News Digital, the Minnesota Star-Tribune, and Entertainment Now, there is no confirmed evidence that Lionel Richie was hiding a serious diagnosis that he has since revealed. What we actually know, verified and sourced, looks like this. Richie described feeling dizzy and strange in his own words during a live performance. He was taken to a hospital as a precaution. 2 shows were postponed on medical advice. A bandmate relayed a second-hand account of dehydration that Richie has never personally confirmed. And 10 days later, Richie thanked his fans, confirmed he was doing well, and returned fully to his tour, without ever naming a specific cause. That's the difference between a headline built for clicks and the facts sitting quietly underneath it. The dramatic version of this story writes itself, a beloved icon hiding a secret health battle behind a famous smile, finally forced to admit the truth. But the version supported by actual reporting is more restrained, and in its own way, more reassuring. A frightening moment. A precautionary hospital stay. A short pause. A return to the stage within less than a week. Does that mean there's nothing more beneath the surface? Not necessarily. Richie is 77 years old, performing physically demanding shows night after night on a lengthy tour. Whether dehydration was the complete explanation, one contributing factor among several, or simply the most convenient thing to tell a concerned bandmate in an anxious moment backstage, is something only Richie and his medical team actually know. Unless he chooses to share more in the future, the rest of us are left reading between the lines of a gracious, carefully worded thank you post, and deciding for ourselves whether that's enough. There's also something worth considering about why a performer in Richie's position might choose to keep the specifics private, even from fans who clearly care about his well-being. At 77, still selling out arenas, still building a career around joy, warmth, and celebration, there's a real incentive to protect the story people get to tell about him. A single detailed medical statement can follow an artist for the rest of their career, shaping headlines and shows to come. A short, grateful message that simply says he's doing well leaves far more room for Richie to keep being exactly what his fans want him to be. Not a cautionary tale about aging in the spotlight, but the man still moving, still singing, still commanding a room decades into a career most performers can only dream of. None of that makes it wrong for fans to want more information. It simply means that, based on everything confirmed so far, more information isn't something Richie has chosen to give. And until he does, every other explanation still circulating remains exactly that, a theory, not a fact. What we can say for certain is this. Lionel Richie frightened an arena full of people who came only expecting joy. He spent a night in a hospital. He paused a tour built on decades of trust between an artist and his audience. And then he came back sooner than almost anyone expected, choosing gratitude over explanation, presence over confession. Whether that silence feels like grace or feels like something withheld may say less about Lionel Richie than it does about how much we've come to feel entitled to know about the private lives of the people whose music has shaped our own.